Grace and peace, my dear people. Freedom is going in the world. Freedom is going in Britain, in France, and to a certain extent in America through the social media. Freedom is going because conservative views are being removed from the internet so that leftist views are being added more while conservative views are getting less and less on the internet. All this is preparations for the new world order, and the social media giants are behind that. Look at poor England. England is jailing people for words, for concepts. Where did you ever hear that? The old Soviet Union used to jail people for holding Western concepts, for holding democratic and republican concepts. Now England is jailing people for simple words like insults. Look how far England has fallen. What a terrible country. And how terrible that Theresa's May government, a conservative government that is supposed to stand for conservative views and for freedom, is actually only having that in name but being leftist or socialist in spirit and in philosophy. All this is clear to us of great trouble that is coming. They are going to censor the truth. They're going to get rid of the truth. Look at Canada. Canada is telling us that we cannot preach against the papacy because it is going to create divisions in the community. Since when they are telling you what doctrines you are to preach and what doctrines you cannot preach? It shows us that freedom is going in the world. So my dear people, we want to just show you some videos that explains to you that freedom is going in the world. You will see it one after the other, but they all show us that freedom is going in the world.
The NRA, with their inflammatory ads and threatening ads, should be sued and forced to take them down.
Ohio student suspended for refusing to leave classroom during gun control walkout. A high school student in Hilliard, Ohio didn't want to pick sides in the contentious gun debate surrounding Wednesday's national walkout, so he stayed in class instead of joining the largely anti-gun protest or an alternative study hall. And let me get this correct, right? So people think Trump's a Nazi and they want to give up their guns while this supposed Nazi is in power. Yeah, they make sense. Hillard Davidson High School senior Jacob Shoemaker was then reportedly slapped with the suspension. The student argued that divisive politics have no place in America's schools, and he refused to take sides in the debate, according to the Associated Press. Here is the suspension letter. Shoemaker's suspension citation was posted online, possibly by a friend, and the story quickly went viral. Student refused to follow instructions after being warned repeatedly by several administrators, the letter said. Student not permitted on school property. School district spokesman Stacy Ratman said official policy prohibited school officials from leaving Shoemaker unattended in the building for security reasons. While Shoemaker said he didn't expect for his actions to generate so much attention, he's prepared to accept the consequences of his decision. Sheesh. What a piece of crap. I mean, they're this is just too much. Too much. And like I said, these kids think Trump is a Nazi, right? Just follow this logic. They think Trump's a Nazi, and while a Nazi's in power, they want to surrender their guns to this Nazi.
The government has banned Canadian right-wing activist and journalist Lauren Southern from Britain, being held at Calais just days after Austrian activist Martin Silner and author Brittany Pettibone were refused entry. Lauren Southern was on a bus traveling to Britain on Sunday night when she was singled out by border police, who seized her passport and took her in for questioning. Breitbart London reporter Chris Tomlinson and sources close to the conservative writer said on Twitter, Lauren Southern is currently being detained by UK border police. She has told me they have taken her passport and taken her in for questioning. After the outrage over Martin Silliner and Brittany Pettibone, does the Home Office want to repeat this? Lauren Southern, on her way to the UK by the bus, has been singled out by border police. They took her passport and she is currently being questioned. I'll keep you updated on the situation as soon as I learn more, said the tweet. Released from detention by British authorities in the French port town Monday morning, Lauren Southern told followers on Twitter that she was doing fine, but had been officially banned from the UK for racism. This is a very serious topic, and I hope the White House and Canadian government actually come out and say something about this. It's like the United Kingdom is trying to compete with Germany and Sweden on who can be the most authoritarian governments there are in the West. Now, those of you asking, what was this horrific racist act she might have done? Did she go out in the streets screaming the N-word? Did she go out in the streets screaming Islam and Muslims need to die? Well, this had to be the case if they arrested her for such a act. Well, no. I'm going to show you a picture of what got her arrested in the first place. And this is it. And here is the picture right here that got her arrested. She's at this little stand with two people and it says she's selling some type of whatever. Allah is a gay god with the Islamic whatever behind a rainbow background. This is the apparent racism, horrific horror that got her arrested in the first place. Now, this goes to two things that I've been saying for quite a while now. The number one thing is that the left is continuously strangulating themselves. And they're strangulating themselves because if you look back in the 90s and the 2000s and what have you, and if someone had something like this who had, the Christian God is a gay god, right? Just reverse it and aim it towards Christianity. If you had something like that and someone got arrested for doing that, there would be an upheaval. There would be mass riots and mass protests if any left-wing hippie would have done this in the early 2000s. You see, the left is strangulating themselves because they are protecting a religion that is known to behead, stone, and throw gays off buildings in their home countries. And the left is openly defending these kind of people, and if you say anything about this specific religion, then you're a racist, you're a bigot, you need to go to jail. And that's exactly what happened. You see, all Lauren Southern and these other two people tried to do was trying to feminize and turn the tables on the Islamic religion. Now, Christianity has had its ass beaten in the last 20 years by the left. You have gay activists marching into majority Christian communities wearing their thongs and their leather jackets and whipping themselves and spanking themselves and saying, yeah, this is activism. Showing this to 5-year-old kids, this is what they need to learn. This is the gay community. But if you do this to Islam, if you, paint yourself up as an Islamic man and have, makeup on or try to feminize yourself and call yourself an Islamist, then you're being a bigot, you're being hateful. And the second thing, and this is why the left is strangulating themselves, because they can't protect gays and push gay LGBT while protecting Islam. Because each way you look at it, this picture of Lauren Southern that got her arrested, this was a clear attempt to gay up Islam, which obviously I see no problem in. You see, if you can do this to Christianity, if you can do this to Hinduism, Judaism, whatever religion there is, then you can do this to Islam. If you can paint Jesus up as some gay person, you can paint Allah up as some gay person. That, ladies and gentlemen, is true equality. As everybody gets treated fairly. I thought that was the cornerstone of what the left fucking wanted. Apparently not. The second thing is that the UK, Sweden, Germany are becoming so left-wing, so far left, that it is becoming a serious problem. People are literally being arrested. And this doesn't only go to Lauren Southern and the other two people who were recently detained in the UK for similar charges. This goes beyond that. There have been cases after the Ariana Grande concert bombing when people were posting online, Islam is bad, this is Islamic and whatnot. These people were being arrested for it, for simply going on social media and posting their disdain and their distrust of Islam. They were being arrested for this. They were being told that they're big bad racists and they need to be silenced. Now you see, online censorship is something we face here in America. It's a real problem. You have conservative people being censored here on YouTube, on Twitter, and what have you. But that's online censorship, and that's as bad as it gets here. In the UK, you have right-wing people being literally arrested, literally being detained by the police there for posting something bad about Islam. And this is where the Western world is really falling apart. Not so much in America, because we don't have people literally being dragged off to the gulags because they posted something unfriendly towards Islam. But like I said, this is a bellwether to what's going on over there in the UK and the Western world, other Western states. You can look to somewhere like Germany, you can look to somewhere like Sweden, and now the UK. You can see these countries going down a path of authoritarianism in favor of far left ideologies, Islam, and other stupid agendas that the far left so happens to push. You see, I've said for a while now that the liberal left has abandoned the LGBT community, that the liberal left has abandoned women. You see, because they cannot protect Islam, a religion that hates gays to the point where they kill them in brutal ways in their own majority Muslim countries, and who continuously beat and kill women for the same things. You have literally a Islamic man who beheads his wife for not cooking the goat the proper way. And this is justifiable in these sort of countries. So the left has literally abandoned gays and women for Islam, for their new religion. The party that was anti-religion about 20 years ago has accepted religion. A party that was against censorship and against mass surveillance on people is now the party for those objectives. I can remember the liberal left fervently hating Christianity, fervently against the idea of state and religion, but now they are in favor of it because it's Islam, because it's racist if you don't believe in such Islamic practices. You see, if a Christian person comes out and says gays are bad, gays are horrible, the left will sit down their throat and protest and riot and do all that shenanigans. But if a Islamic person does the same thing, the left is silent, the left is quiet, the left has nothing to say about it. What Lauren Southern did was not racism, because Islam as a religion is not a race, it's a religion. You have black, white, Arab, Asian people in the Islamic religion. You have every race you can think of that is Islamic. So it is not racism. It's not based on race. It's just an ideology. It's a belief. Very stupid beliefs, very barbaric beliefs, but beliefs nonetheless. If you, the liberal left, have no problem criticizing Christianity, then you should have no problem criticizing a religion. That's what it is. It's a religion, people. Remember that. If you have a problem with criticizing Islam as a religion, then you are again proven to be literal hypocrites on the issue of religion. Because the liberal left goes out of their way to find Christian bakers, find the ones that refuse them to bake them in gay cake, and then take them to court and literally ruin their life savings and their life as a whole. This is what the left clearly does on a daily basis. But since the left is so for taking in refugees, then we should take in European refugees, because obviously these countries in Europe have become dictatorships. What does that sound like to you? To me, it sounds like the UK is no better than these Islamic states that literally behead gays and behead women for various of reasons. To literally be arrested for something so small, so minute, as having this little stand, selling these little Allah is a gay god things, to be arrested for that. Something as small as that. What happens if you're a British person who so happens to make a YouTube video criticizing Islam? Will your door be busted down by the UK police and throw you in handcuffs and then throw you in the back of the car because you happen to say something mean about their favorite religion.
The UK is blocking conservatives from visiting that country. They say conservatives could be hazardous to the nation's diversity somehow. This past weekend, American YouTube personality Brittany Pettibone and her Austrian boyfriend were barred from entering the UK because they planned to interview Tommy Robinson, an outspoken critic of Islam. Then on Monday, British police halted a visit by Canadian journalist Lauren Southern on the grounds she was, quote, a radical Christian and therefore possibly a terrorist. Meanwhile, radical Muslims, more than 400 former ISIS fighters, are believed to have re-entered Britain without any problem at all. Indeed, they were welcomed. Huh? Katie Hopkins is a columnist with The Rebel. She wrote the book Rude, and she joins us now. Katie, it's great to see you. I mean, only a country that really hates itself, its heritage, its own people, would act like this.
It's absolute madness, Tucker. I can't even tell you. For the regular British man or woman in the street, they're just shaking their heads and going, what has this country come to? We're welcoming back the mad mullahs. We're welcoming back the jihadis after they've done their jihad in Iraq or Syria. And by the way, they're not that good at jihad. You know, so you're supposed to blow yourself up if you come back. You probably weren't that great at jihad in the first place.
Point.
But we are turning away conservatives who just want to stand up for being Christian conservatives, and our Home Office here has sided with the Islamists of Luton. We seem to have some new blasphemy laws here in the UK that we didn't really know about, but are certainly being enforced.
Blasphemy laws that are applied to Christians, but not to Muslims. So what undergirds this? So of course, you know, for centuries, Britain sent forth Anglican missionaries to spread Christianity around the world, and by the way, they did. And now they would not let those same people in their own country in favor of ISIS members. What animates this? Why the change? Why do they feel this way?
There's this pervasive thought that's spread amongst liberals, it's amongst the Labour Party, the Democrats, if you will, and the Conservatives. We have a Conservative government in power. You wouldn't believe it. It seems to be that being white is considered wrong. Being Christian is considered wrong. Trump is wrong. And then there's a list of right answers. To be Islamic is right. To welcome back jihadis is right. We shouldn't prosecute them. We should embrace them. And it's really getting to a point here in the UK where, you know, we're up there on the endangered species list. To be a white Christian conservative woman like myself, I'm right up there on the endangered, you know, animals list, up there with the black rhino. And the black rhino has got an advantage because he's black.
So, I mean, the UK is a democracy, purportedly. You voted for Brexit. You still get to vote there for the time being. The majority of your population, I would bet you my card, does not agree with the policies I just described. Why are they putting up with them?
There's this kind of sense right now, this place, this country has never been this tense. It feels like a pressure cooker, you know, and someone's screwing down the lid. And there's going to be a tipping point. And that feeling of just people going to be rising up to say, right, no more of this. We will not be silenced anymore. And the thing is, people hold on to certain voices. There's a lot of support for these YouTubers that you spoke of that were banned. Yes. And when you start silencing the people that were even, you know, finally speaking out for us, people like myself, in fact, I'm surprised I'm still here. I'm surprised I haven't been deported. You know, them people, there will come a point where enough is enough. And I think there will be some kind of uprising, because watching Conservatives being detained for 2 days, being charged with kind of, or detained on terror, suspicion of terror offences, when they're just young Conservatives with a passion for their culture and a passion for their country, it really is such a disappointing time for the UK. Yeah. And I do think there needs to be much more of an attitude where we stop tiptoeing around the cultures that choose to come and join us and start defending the culture they have chosen to join.
It used to be kind of a free country. That's authoritarian, what you're describing, and I'm sorry.
A mass rebellion may be brewing in Britain against the attack on free speech by globalist liberals. That's what we'll be talking about. On today's video, I have to give a huge shout out to one of our very own, Daniel Tubb, who's part of our Turley Talks Facebook mastermind group. who gave us some on-the-ground reporting of a very significant event that took place yesterday in London. Now, I know many of you are familiar with what happened to Martin Sellner, an Austrian fellow from the group Generation Identity, and Brittany Pettibone, who's also a very popular blogger and commentator. They were headed into Britain, into Heathrow. Britain wanted to interview Tommy Robinson, who you may know from his Rebel Media days. And Martin Sellner planned to speak at Speaker's Corner in London's Hyde Park, which if you don't know, you can read it online. It's pretty cool. It's been sort of the ceremonial home of free speech in London for hundreds of years. So the likes of Karl Marx and Lenin and George Orwell and everyone in between has spoken there. Incidentally, I read that historically it was also a place where Christian ministers gathered to preach, but commentators have noted that as of late there were just as many Muslim as Christians preaching from there, if not more. It gives you a sense of how times have changed in London. Now, those of you who know the Canadian YouTube personality Lauren Southern, she was there as well. She was with Sellner and Pettibone. However, when they arrived at Heathrow, they were all detained by the British government, and apparently they were accused of racism and bigotry towards Islam. Now, according to Sellner and the others, they were separated from each other. They were handcuffed. He was handcuffed, and he personally was detained for 3 days. I mean, he was actually put into a prison wing with illegal aliens, which is so ironic since Generation Identity is all about exposing the Islamization of Europe through both legal and illegal immigration. Now, according to Lauren Southern, when she was detained and interrogated, this is what she said happened. Quote, "They asked me if I'm a Christian extremist. Asked me how I feel about running over people with cars. They asked me about Tommy Robinson. Asked how I would describe myself politically. Asked me how I would describe nationalism." Close quote. And so as a result, all three were deported. They were all deported. They were actually officially banned from entering the UK. Now, British officials did issue a statement which said that the border force, quote, "has the power to refuse entry to an individual if it is considered that his or her presence in the UK is not conducive to the public good," close quote. Well, first of all, I'm very happy and delighted to report that these officials still use the terms his or her and recognize that there are, in fact, only two genders. Thank you for that. Now, what's so neat in all of this is that while he was detained, Martin Sellner penned a letter from prison in sort of a kind of Martin Luther King style. He penned a letter from prison. And this past Sunday, Tommy Robinson got up and read it from the Speaker's Corner in the presence of thousands of free speech supporters. Now, we're fortunate to have some first-hand, on-the-ground accounting of what took place from our own Daniel Tubb, who was there. And according to Daniel, the whole event was, as he put it, magnificent. There were thousands there with a lot of passion and will to fight back against police shutting down free speech. And in addition to the thousands on ground, there are tens of thousands who were watching the live feed online, who continue to be watching it. You can do it as well. Breitbart has a great write-up on it. And a number of videos are making their rounds on YouTube. Now, it is being reported that there were some Muslim counter-protesters who were attempting to more or less shut the whole thing down, but to no avail. If Daniel's account is any indicator, it's an event that really fired up and encouraged thousands of Brits to stand up to this liberal globalist censorship of conservative, nationalist, populist ideas, which of course are currently sweeping the continent of Europe as we speak, and in many ways redefining the entire electoral map. Now, I think that Britons are beginning to really smell a rat here. I think they recognize that acts of censorship such as this are ultimately about protecting the power that liberal globalists have in the public square. This actually goes back to the whole notion of censorship. I actually had a student of mine who did her thesis on censorship, and she pointed out that the term censorship derives from the Latin censere, which means to appraise or value or judge. And so the whole notion of censorship reveals what a society values, what a society honors and seeks to protect. We censor, that is, we supervise and control the circulation of ideas and information in society, always with an eye toward protecting the values that we hold most dear in that society. And what that means then is that all societies censor in some way, shape, or form. At the very least, we're going to censor censorship, right? Even as a society that's absolutely dedicated to free speech is in effect censoring censorship. So the question is never whether we're going to censor, but rather on what basis are we censoring? What values or systems are we trying to protect? And that's where I think many Britons and Westerners in general, that's where they're beginning to smell a rat in all of this. They're recognizing that the values that represent a secular globalist society are ones that, when protected, involve silencing very important and significant, indeed historically sacred ideas. A key term in understanding what a liberal globalist society reveres and values, I think, is highly relevant here, is a term known as emancipatory politics. Emancipatory politics involves utilizing the power of the state to liberate people from traditional social structures and arrangements that are now deemed unjust by globalist standards. We have to remember that globalization, in effect, de-traditionalizes society. Globalization entails social dynamics that relativize local customs and traditions to wider economic and scientific and consumer-based forces. So whereas pre-modern or pre-globalistic societies are characterized generally by very set ways of thinking about religion and family and vocation and gender, globalized societies come in and offer a mass range of consumer-based options that basically call into question the whole sanctity of local beliefs and practices, relativize them to a veritable food court of many creedal alternatives. Globalists see traditions as artificially stifling. They see globalization as providing people with more lifestyle choices than ever before, emancipating them from the supposedly arbitrary controls and definitions indicative of traditional societies. And so this is where you get this whole notion of emancipatory politics. Emancipatory politics seek to liberate individuals from what are now considered unjust and arbitrary social impediments that characterize the once sacred practices of local custom and tradition. The injustice here, as I mentioned, involves the arbitrary impediments traditional societies supposedly impose on the individual who wants to exercise sovereign control over his or her own life circumstances. Because traditional societies tend to impose arbitrarily key identity markers such as gender, sexual orientation, religious affiliation on their populations, the extent to which these impositions are overcome and corrected is now the new measure of what is labeled justice and equality and liberty in a globalized society. And so now that emancipatory politics function as the highest value of our globalized society, our speech, our very words that we use and the concepts that we argue for, they're going to be reappraised in light of this new globalist value system. So we ought not be surprised to see that where once it was considered perfectly rational to uphold and defend the borders of a nation, well, now that's considered to be nativist and xenophobic and bigoted. Where we once believed there were two genders, well, now that's called transphobic. Well, the technical term is cissexism, which is one of the stupidest words I've ever come across. Whereas we once thought of ourselves as a Christian civilization, well, now that's considered religious discrimination and bigotry. Whereas we once thought marriage was between a man and a woman, we're now told that such a view is homophobic. And we can go on and on and on. Now, what's so ironic in all of this is that the key way in which emancipatory politics is enacted is the notion of what's called dignitarian harm, which Princeton professor Robert George is calling really the key thought police rationalization of our age. Dignitarian harm is, in effect, it asserts that I as a sovereign individual have the right to live as I choose without abusive, derogatory, and disparaging responses and remarks. Now, dignitarian harm is perhaps the single most cited basis for the restriction of free speech. And it sounds to me like that was precisely what was appealed to by these British authorities who deported Sellner and the others. But more than that, dignitarian harm actually gives special class protection for what are considered minority groups, such as blacks and women and gays and transgenders, and yes, Islamists, Muslims. And it gives them the right to charge with malice anyone who says anything in any way that can be taken as disparaging and discriminatory. This is the value system that's governing the kinds of censorship that are detaining and deporting right-wing commentators. Now, you'll notice I call this whole notion ironic because those so concerned about dignitarian harm have absolutely no problem calling others racists and homophobes and bigots. In other words, they have no problem harming other people's dignity. They have no problem disparaging those on the right, nationalists, populists, and traditionalists. No problem whatsoever. And of course, that's because censorship and the collapse of free speech are not ultimately about protecting anyone's dignity. Censorship and the collapse of free speech are ultimately about protecting the monopoly of liberal globalization over the public square. That is what's really going on here. It has absolutely nothing to do ultimately with anyone's dignity. Otherwise, why are you disparaging nationalists and populists and patriots? Why are you interrogating them like that? Why would you be so utterly offensive and accusing them of racism, xenophobia? Why would you be slandering us with name-calling and deportations and the like? It's because this censorship has nothing ultimately to do with anyone's dignity. It's ultimately about keeping the liberal globalist monopoly over the public square. That's the rat that the British populace is beginning to smell here. Now, again, I think the good news in all this is that actions like this, deportation, are only going to fuel populist and patriotic sentiments. It's already doing it, with the thousands gathered over at London's Hyde Park to hear a speech banned by their politicians and policemen. It's already happening. It's happening all over YouTube, where everyone's talking about it. So there's no putting the free speech genie back in the censorship bottle, as it were. That's pretty good. I like that. Propagations such as this one are only going to fuel the nationalist populist movements that are sweeping Europe and will eventually overwhelm the United Kingdom as well.
The slow boil in many countries in the Western world is now witnessing a pot full of freedoms evaporating into the proverbial ether. While countries like Sweden and Canada are racing toward the bottom, the UK, not to be outdone, has made some pretty stellar examples of its government's disdain for the free flow of ideas as well as a person's right for freedom of speech and conscience. And for all intents and purposes, the authorities are not even trying to hide their disproportionate use of force, custodial sentences, and the unleashing of the establishment on those it means to silence. And for the purposes of this video, we will be examining the UK and its descent into an anarcho-tyranny state. Anarcho-tyranny is a concept used in critiquing modern social democracy. Samuel Francis argued that the problems of managerial states extend to issues of crime and justice. In 1992, he introduced the word anarcho-tyranny, and he once defined it this way: "We refuse to control real criminals. That's the anarchy, so we control the innocent. That's the tyranny." Or to put it another way, in the UK, the country's authorities have created a social climate of anarchy. That's when they fail to enforce the laws equally, while at the same time, when it does enforce existing laws, it does so for oppressive purposes, which is the tyranny. And it does this via the criminalization of the law-abiding population. This is accomplished via exorbitant taxation, the invasion of privacy, bureaucratic regulations, the engineering of the social institutions such as local schools and families, but most importantly, with the forced imposition of thought control via multiculturalist curricula, sensitivity training, gun control laws that are used to disarm otherwise law-abiding citizens while having no impact on violent criminals who can get their guns from the black market sources, and most importantly, the nebulous and ever-used concept of hate crime laws. Reading from the London Metropolitan Police website, it becomes clear that, at least in the UK, an entire class of laws is meant to keep a lid on the social tensions that were in fact created by the policies enacted by the political class. These laws are stated to be in place to protect people from, quote-unquote, being offended. To quote directly, a hate crime is defined as any criminal offense which is perceived by the victim or any person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice. Evidence of a hate element is not a requirement. You do not need to personally perceive the incident to be hate-related. It would be enough if another person, a witness, or even a police officer thought the incident was hate-related. Clear examples of this you can see in regards to the gross overreach by authorities in the UK in just the past week with the debacle of Mark Meacham, or Count Dankula as he's known on his YouTube channel, and he has been dragged through the courts for 2 years for teaching his girlfriend's pug in a prank video to salute on command, as well as other offensive utterances. When making the decision to convict Count Dankula, the presiding judge obviously implied that context and intent were irrelevant. Thus, witness the tyranny. And these kinds of cases are unfortunately very common in the UK. To compare and contrast, there are countless gangs marauding all across the country, Telford being the latest grisly example of an estimated 1 million young girls that have been affected by forced enrichment. For decades, the police, social services, local councils, and the media have all conspired to silence girls for the sake of community cohesion. In fact, Labour MP and key Corbyn ally Naz Shah even shared a Twitter message telling Rotherham victims to, quote-unquote, shut their mouths for the good of diversity. Rotherham is the infamous northern town that will forever be linked to the vibrant enrichment forced upon its native British population, so much so that its former Labour MP Sarah Champion described these now common intercultural exchanges in the UK between Pakistani men and white children as a national disaster. And for her trouble, she was forced to resign because she pointed out the obvious, which cannot go without punishment in an anarcho-tyranny state. Now, compare and contrast the reaction of the authorities to the countless diabolical crimes spanning decades, which in fact they tried to hide, and the reaction by those same authorities against citizens that speak out in reaction to the horrors that were created by the political class. It is these people, rather than the former, that are met with maniacal enforcement and state oppression. In fact, officials in Rotherham moved to ban protests against their own incompetence as they appealed to the Home Secretary for emergency special powers under the Public Order Act of 1986. Now, witness thus the state-created anarchy. Tyranny must be enforced to stop the law-abiding from commenting on the anarchy aided and abetted by the state. Think also on the massive amount of time and money spent on keeping people from being offended on social media in the UK. Just this past week, in a tweet from the official Scotland Police Twitter feed, they warn potential thought criminals with, "You may think online you're anonymous. You can create fake profiles and no one can trace you. That's wrong. The messages you type and send can be traced back to you. The same laws apply to online messages, images, and videos. What you post now can affect you later in life." This is all pretty standard stuff, and in fact, 9 people a day on average, or more than 3,300 per year, are being arrested in the UK for posting allegedly offensive messages online, as the police forces on that island step up their campaign to combat trolling on social media, with arrests for offensive Facebook and Twitter posts soaring in London. Thus, tyranny is executed under Section 127 of the Communications Act of 2003, which makes it illegal to intentionally cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety to another. Making sure people are not offended by others speaking out is the national priority of authorities in the UK, not tackling the underlying problems that create the thought criminals themselves. In fact, consider this. Why is the government so intent on stopping people from speaking out and controlling the human emotion of profound dislike for something? Again, it is the criminalization to prevent the law-abiding to be at odds with or speak out against the circumstances that the political class has imposed upon the population without their consent. Thus, you will see more and more and more suppression of people and their ability to speak freely, as well as the state's abusing of its authority to clamp down on thought criminals like Tommy Robinson, for example. The result of anarcho-tyranny is that the government swells in power, criminals and their ilk are not controlled, and law-abiding citizens wind up being repressed by the state and attacked by thugs with impunity. Former West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt said all the way back in 1990 that political freedoms rely on shared political culture as much as on oppositions and balances that social differentiation creates, and when the common culture disintegrates under the impact of mass migrations, only institutionalized force can hold the regime together. And as we can readily see, force used against the law-abiding only is a tactic used throughout the Western world and the UK in particular. In terms of solutions, first and foremost, what is needed in the UK and every other Western nation for that matter, save the US, are new laws that unequivocally guarantee free speech, no matter the amount of offense that may be, could be, or perhaps be had. When you can't even reasonably or rationally talk about the problems that plague your society, real solutions to the anarcho-tyranny state created by the ruling class to punish the law-abiding for speaking out upon their own dispossession will never be found. And when coming full circle with words to take heed, Francis argued that anarcho-tyranny, which is built into the managerial system, cannot be solved by simply fighting corruption or voting out incumbents. In fact, he says that the system generates a false conservatism that encourages people to act passively in the face of perpetual revolution. He concludes that only by devolving power back toward law-abiding citizens can sanity be restored.
But he describes himself as a liberal, and that kind of comes off watching some of his videos, and they're funny. He's a talented guy. You know, John Cleese made skits making fun of Adolf Hitler of Monty Python fame. We have Charlie Chaplin famously with his short film The Dictator making fun of Hitler dressed up as Hitler. We have Disney doing it, but this guy isn't allowed to do it. The police came and arrested him. Mark Meekin, again, joins us. I believe he's in Scotland. He can tell me where he's at. But I know it was all over. It's in Scotland. That's where the cops went and arrested him, came to his house. And just the media with a straight face said, yeah, you don't make a video with your pug doing the Hitler salute. I made a video 3 years ago when they were banning the JCPenney teapot because someone thought it looked like Hitler. It's a silver-colored teapot with a black handle. Looks nothing like Hitler, but someone could see it. Like if you see Hitler in a cloud, do you ban that? And so I pointed out that my French Bulldog captain looks like he has a Hitler mustache. Will I be arrested? And if you're a TV viewer, there it is, the Hitler dog, ladies and gentlemen. And again, Captain doesn't mean it that he looks like Hitler. The question is, why did I pick him as a puppy? Maybe that shows my subconscious love for Hitler. Maybe I should be taken in and interrogated like 1984 until I tell the truth. I mean, this is meant to be over the top. This is meant to where they can ban any speech they want, whenever they want, while our governments bring in radical jihadists, while they allow all these other disparate groups to come in and spew whatever anti-Semitic garbage, whatever they want. And quite frankly, I say if you're a citizen of a country, you got free speech, you can say it as long as you don't hurt somebody. But will there be purges of people that maybe look like Hitler, or their dog looks like Hitler, or maybe people keep seeing Mary or Jesus in bagels and Danishes? If someone sees Hitler maybe in vines growing on your house, will you be arrested? And by the way, I'm not joking. That's what this is. With the teapot and JCPenney, it's reaching that level where now people will say, hey, let's get Mexican food. Let's go, don't say the word Mexican. Or let's go get Chinese. Don't say Chinese. I've seen it in Austin. People shouted down. Knowledge is now criminal. Just like homosexual. They say that's a hateful word. Robin Page of the BBC was actually arrested a decade ago, a host of One Man and His Dog, because he said rural communities deserve the same rights as homosexuals and Mexicans or Muslims or anybody else. He listed a whole group of people. And ladies and gentlemen, because he said homosexual, he was arrested. Heterosexual, homosexual. Even if something's hurtful, you should be able to say it. But Facebook says no. So that's where all this is going, to shut down free speech, not to stop radicals or whatever, or extremists.
Yes, my dear people, we stand for free speech. We stand for liberty of conscience. If speech is free, then it being free would mean that there may be offensive things coming to people. There may be offense coming to people. And if offense comes to people, all a person have to do is to tolerate the offense or to ignore it. But do not make people more thin-skinned by legislating offense. Imagine Britain, instead of spending time dealing with crime, with petty thief, and petty stealing all over the country, is more dealing with people's insults, people's offense. Who tell them that they should legislate such thing? Why do people support such legislation? If you don't want others to be offended, what about you being offended by your speech being taken away? Would they also deal with that? No. You see, anytime they say offense, it always works on one area. And this is how much these countries have fallen. So we call upon Britain, we call upon France, we call upon America, we call upon those countries like Canada, Australia, that is doing away with freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, to desist from what you are doing. The wrath of God is going to fall upon you if you don't stop. But we who know that these things are happening as the end draws near, sees the signs that Jesus Christ is coming very soon. We have liberty of conscience. And if our conscience tells us we must show something to be wrong, which government can tell us we mustn't do that because it is offensive? Since when they have been given a job to deal with offense? No government should be dealing with offense. Government should deal with breaking the law and also ensuring peace. But to create a law, to create offense, offense should not be dealt with. Leave offense. Because then you can say what is offensive, and you can make almost anything offensive, so much that the name Jesus is offensive. Even Easter, although it is a false teaching, that is offensive. If a person says there are only two genders, that is offensive. Every single thing that they want to say is offensive, they can say it is offensive, and so censor those views, and so stop liberty of conscience, and so stop freedom of speech through the idea of offense. But God is showing us by this that the end is near, even at the doors. So may you accept the truth, and may you follow Jesus Christ before it is too late. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.